Welcome to HeartChangeU live stream. We're glad to have you with us. We especially appreciate our live listeners who can offer questions and give us feedback immediately. But we know that many of our people actually pick it up at a later time. And if you're one of those, we're glad to have you. If you're picking it up whenever, whether it's live or whether it's later on, pass it on to people who you believe it will bless. And we thank you for joining the team. Kimberly, it's great to have you.
Oh man, is the weather beautiful or what?
No,
It makes me want to stay out and walk for miles.
it's a good day.
It is. It's always a good day with God.
And we had a great weekend.
Oh my gosh, I was so blessed by it. I actually can't wait to do more work with you.
Well,
It inspired me.
it was interesting. A lot of the times when I do the retreats, I'm solo, so to speak. I mean, obviously we have worship leaders and I'm very interactive. And so it's not me just standing up there going, but it was great to work together and to just watch God mesh things.
Yes, I think that a lot of people who were there are really receiving from God. Some of them immediately, some of them it may take a little longer. Like you said, to open up. And I love the idea of you have to let God give to you before you can give to others. And that time of allowing the anxiety and stress to leave the room.
It was really interesting, and not to give away all of our
Sure,
secrets,
sure.
but and again, I don't know that would happen the same way another time, because
Right.
when you follow God, it's who knows, but it was a real, I'm going to call it a surprise. So many people came in with anxiety of, oh no, we're going to have to face all of these things. We're going to have these tears. And we ended up in that first morning session with just an extended period of time of God ministering beautifully to people, establishing rest, a sense of healing and strengthening. That was a surprise to me as that came down, but as I was watching it unfold, and that's the best way to describe it, it was just like, wow.
And I
is
think
cool.
the comments from the women as they were leaving, they were all smiling, most of them, and would hug me and say, wow, this is not what we expected. We expected to go home on a downer with no hope, but they were all filled with hope. And I think they came anticipating, oh my gosh, this is going to be a dredge of a day or, whatever. And so I think that what they learned was it wasn't as difficult as maybe they thought it would be.
One of my one-liners is, if it don't show up, you won't grow up. And so many of the people understand that, the idea of venting in counseling, and you have to talk about it, you have to get it out in the open, and it's almost like you're picking an open sore. And so many of them came in with that expectation of, okay, we're going to be picking at an open sore and it's going to be painful, and this is not going to be a fun process, a good process, but hopefully it'll produce some good fruit before it's all over, because if not, it's just going to be really ugly and I'm just going to be miserable one more time, and I don't know if I want to do that. And many of the people came in with almost that Eeyore sort of a miserable, let's get this over with sort of a mentality, and it wasn't like that at all.
No, it wasn't. I have a question.
Okay.
Since this is Question You Day. Okay, so what is the difference between a habit and an addiction? Or is there any difference at all?
Well, an addiction is a habit, but a habit isn't necessarily an addiction.
Okay, so how would you define the difference between the two of them?
Well, let me use a different term, and that's baselines. If you think about having to make choices, what if everything you did required choices? And let me just, start with lifting your finger. If you think about babies, I mean, what's one of the first things they do? At some point, they begin to discover their hands, and they begin to discover movement. And now I've got to bring that hand to my mouth. Oh, now I know how to bring my hand to the mouth. If you think about that and move it out of the language of baselines, I mean, out of habits into baselines, think about all of the baselines that I'm working towards as a human being. And so I get this in place. If you had to engage your brain at everything you did, you would be totally incapacitated. You could not do life. So you're working through a series of baselines. And what a habit is an intentional step, or in some cases unintentional, but let's just go with the good side. It's an intentional step along the way to developing a baseline to where now I have instinctive behavior that is positive behavior. And so in a good sense, that's what a habit is. I develop a habit of reading the Word. I've spent so many years of the first part of my day is get up and have my quiet time, have my time with God. That's just like instinctive. You know, some people get up and do their coffee. Well, I'm not a coffee drinker, so I get up and open my Bible or turn on my worship music or whatever. That's a baseline that is there that I simply do without thinking. I don't get up and go, I wonder if I'll read my Bible today. It's just automatic there. And so habits, the right kind of habits, will establish positive baselines to where you can actually use your brain cells for something that is the next step along the way.
That makes sense, because sometimes I've, let's say, been standing in the kitchen and grab a chip over and over again, and I'm doing something else or watching a show, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, I've got this chip in my hand and I'm eating it and I'm not even aware that I'm doing it. And so I understand that about, you can almost not know in your brain you're doing it.
You don't. I mean, after a while, it's automatic pilot, and you don't even know that you've done. I assume other people have this, where it's like, kind of like you're about 20 miles down the road, and it's kind of like, oh, have I even been engaged in my driving?
Yeah.
Has it been dangerous? You know, and you've been on kind of an automatic pilot. Let me take it one more step, which is kind of interesting. I believe that your conscience is tied to your normal. In other words, you have a subconscious set of feelers that are feels right, feels wrong. So that's the other thing that habits do. At some point, they develop a normal inside of us. And whenever I'm trying to do something abnormal, that's not a baseline, that's not an established habit, it will take higher energy. It will take greater work. It will take greater thought. So what happens, our spiritual feeler begins to notice that. It notices the abnormal. It notices the extra energy. So many times when we're getting ready to do a new habit, we're trying to form it, we're trying to take those steps, it will actually feel wrong to us. What's interesting, that whole habit baseline thing establishes a sense of right and wrong. So now I have another layer. Not only does it take energy, brain cells, active effort, there's also a feels right, feels wrong. When you're standing there eating chips, you know, to no end, you know, incessantly, I'm overkilling it, obviously.
Nope.
And you're just going chip, chip, chip. At some point, it actually feels right to you. It feels normal. And this is a part of the addictive process. Once I slide into that realm, it actually feels wrong for me to try to break that realm. And so all of a sudden now I'm beginning to realize, wow, look at all the different pieces that are working against me in order to change a bad habit that is actually addictive in nature, and it's harmful in nature. And you can go with two classes. You've got harmful, and then you've got addictive, which is really harmful.
It makes me think of when I was in my abusive relationship, I couldn't go exercise enough. I mean, I was addicted to exercise. Now, most people would say, well, exercise is good for you, but not when I was going and doing it to avoid what was going on. And I used that as an avoidance. I would run 20, 30 miles a day, you know, just to not be at home. Pastor's looking at my eye at me like, whoa, yes.
I mean, exercise 20, 30 miles a day. Okay.
Bike or run or whatever.
Bike 20 miles, okay. Run 20 miles a day.
Well, I can't do it now.
That's serious. That's
so
serious.
for me to stop that was very painful for me to have to sit still, like you talk about, not go, go, go. I think it was that go, go, go mentality, and my cortisol levels were just shot, and then I had to stop. And so that was a habit that was formed out of avoidance, I think, in my life, trying to do something, not deal with things. So anyway, next part of that question, is there a difference between tradition and habit?
Well, let me throw a different one on here. Tradition usually is taught moralistically, so it goes right along with what I'm saying. Every event, every thought, every action, etc., typically has what I call an imprint tied to it. And so that imprint sometimes maybe feels good, feels bad, feels right, feels wrong. Tradition typically is taught moralistically, which means that now I don't just have a it feels good imprint. I have a feels right imprint. And so as soon as you assign that feels right, now my conscience is involved. So we've got this tradition, which is a habit. So it has all of the normal stuff of habit. But if it was taught moralistically, which again, right or wrong, this is tradition. This is the elders. You are dishonoring the elders. You are dishonoring so and so. Now it is a feels right, feels wrong. Now I have that to overcome at the exact same time that I'm looking at this habit. And with traditions, very seldom are traditions really thought through. I do the same thing with rules. It's kind of interesting. I believe that God gave the law as a description of reality and how to respond to reality. And when you're reading the Old Testament, there are times when God changes the laws. Well, if the condition on the grounds change, then the relationship of God to the people changes, which means that the rules change. If you understand rules from that perspective as a description of reality, now I can step back and I can actually start thinking about life in terms of, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense anymore. Well, with tradition, you're not allowed to do that. You are dishonoring somebody, somewhere, somehow, by changing the tradition. And I've got a situation where this is actually being incredibly harmful or destructive or inefficient, or add whatever word you want. This tradition just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
And people are like, but we can't change that because the imprint, the spiritual tag, the moralistic teaching that came along with the tradition says, nope, can't do that. That would be dishonoring.
Yeah, and I'm thinking also in a simpler term, but it causes a lot of fights with couples when they first get married. And I've got my traditions in my family, and you've got yours, and holidays, and trying to shuffle all that around. How would you advise someone to let go, to compromise? Because I think you do feel like you're dishonoring your family, the traditions that you guys set up, but now you're married, and it's time for you to form your own, I guess, idea of what's best.
In my marriage counseling, I actually have an entire session that talks about this, that talks about, in the same language that I'm using now, I call it conscience, okay? Coming out of your family, your conscience was shaped this way. Your traditions went this way. Do you know the difference between what is biblical and what is not? If something is clearly biblical and it really is right or wrong, well, then that takes priority. And a lot of times, let's just say one family is very much biblical, and let's say the other family is absolutely not biblical. That's not a place where you compromise. That's not a place where, okay, we'll do half of yours and half of mine, because that is an actual right and wrong. It's not a my conscience versus your conscience, and neither one of them are in Christ. Neither one of them are based on God. That's a real right and wrong sort of a thing. And a lot of times you'll get families that are blending like that you don't get to blend. You have to come completely over here and stand. There are other times when it really becomes practical. It's like, okay, what we're doing here is practical or it's not practical, it's destructive. I mean, you start taking a look at those, and you start figuring out what really works. Now, there are times when you sort all of that out, and it's not biblical, where you really do have to get to a place of, we're not going to run over your stuff for my stuff, vice versa. Once I'm out of that absolutely right and wrong, I want to get into efficient and practical. I want to apply some standards to that. But I also want to give you a sense of worth, along with me a sense of worth, where we're not both being challenged to throw everything away. So that's where now we have to share, we have to compromise on those, and we'll do our traditions here, we'll do your traditions here, and work this thing out.
Yeah, that's good. I like, I've been reading in Psalms about not bowing down, but standing. And I think I read that this morning, and I thought, oh my goodness, if we bow down our standards to something else, I realized that was worshiping something else. I think I realized that for the first time this morning, and I went, wow, I want to stand for morally what the Bible says and what is truth, and not bow down to those other things. So I like that you said maybe that's an area you don't compromise, especially if the other family is not a believer. You say, I am going to go to church on Christmas or whatever, Okay, another question. What would you tell a parent whose child is in middle school? They become aware that they're doing drugs. What do you suggest as a first step? And is prayer and asking other people to pray enough?
Let's just start with a simple no.
Yeah.
Prayer, asking people to pray is good. Middle school is hard. I mean, in terms of that, I mean, if it's high school, it's a completely different age and stage. But at middle school, you're still, hopefully, and I'm having to throw that word out, you're still hopefully at a point where the child is malleable. Now, what do I say?
What does that word mean?
Shapeable,
Shapeable,
formable,
okay.
Impressionable. They're still going to listen to you. If you have not been parenting at a more significant level, in today's world, by the time they hit middle school, they can be gone. But if you've been doing active parenting at middle school, is the normal stage where children begin to say, I'm growing up, I'm becoming an adult, I'm my own person. And so you're still in that stage where, okay, there should be some ability to impact and some ability to shape. And I actually am in favor of a stronger approach where the parents at that particular point, and again, I'm going to put this asterisk, there are children that are farther gone, that are more like they were in high school at that point, that frankly a stronger approach is absolutely going to shut them down, turn them off, too late, already lost it. So if you had said high school, I would be giving you a different language. But for most middle schoolers, I believe a stronger approach where you sit down and you let them know, hey, I'm aware of what's going on. This is not okay. And we are going to start at a level of just coming alongside and supporting you and loving you and taking some steps. But step by step, we're going to move this thing through a process to get you some help, or to squeeze this thing to where at the very least it becomes very, very difficult for you to continue in this behavior. And again, hopefully it's not condemning, it's not belittling. There's a whole series of things that the parents need to learn in terms of how to approach that and how to engage with positive parenting there, that I'm not sure I want to go into here. But what I would say is I think at middle school, if I'm the parents, it's like, this is not going to continue. Now, it's not up for discussion. We're not playing games here. We're going to take this one step at a time, and we're going to walk this through. It is not okay for you, as my son, as my daughter, to be involved in this. And so we're going to engage. Now, again, in the current culture, there is such a permissiveness that has been drilled into the kids as well as the parents, and in some cases the parenting style is abusive. So if the parenting style is already abusive, then being heavy-handed will actually increase the problems. So I'm assuming someone here who at least understands parenting skills and is not being heavy-handed already. I'm assuming just in the world that we live in, kids are getting exposed to more and more stuff, younger ages, in ways that are just grotesque and sick. And so you can have excellent parents who suddenly find out that, wow, we're in trouble. What do we do? And so if parents are already heavy-handed, now it's like, back up. You better figure out how to build healthy relationship with your kids, and adding to this process a very harsh, heavy-handed response actually is going to be counterproductive at that point.
Yeah, and is it true, I mean, from my experience and some other people, that if you can, they're still under your care and direction up to a certain age, excuse me, and after that, you don't have a say-so in their life anymore. Is that true?
Our world is changing so fast in terms of, and you're seeing all kinds of initiatives around the nation right now where, parents aren't even being told things. It's like, no, parents aren't allowed to be brought in on decisions. So, I mean, again, the dynamics are just so messy over there. And what I would come back to, that's why parenting needs to start early. It needs to be continuous. You need to be engaged with your children, which is harder and harder with the electronics that are going on. You need times when the electronics are off and you're getting FaceTime. The number one thing that I will talk about in parenting is the family meal with no electronics, where we're sitting down, we're looking at one another, we're learning to talk to one another. That may be the single most important event, and the more often that can happen, the better. Things like that, if you can develop a family devotion where you actually, again, get people to talk about what they care about, kids, and pray about it together. There are things like that if I'm engaging in quality parenting, now when this event comes along, we have a basis for communication and we actually can take some steps.
That's changed now.
Well, sorry, but the Disney Channel, and it's just, parents are pictured as out of touch and foolish and negative and et cetera. And it's a subtle message, but that message gets through to where there's just, and again, it's not just the one channel, it's children's programming in general has changed. And it takes a lot of work as a parent to overcome all of that. Okay. 2 questions, and we stayed on them for a while, but hopefully that's part of what I will tell you. If you're putting questions in and you're wanting a simple yes or no answer, you probably won't get that here so much. We're going to go into detail. We're going to give you some things to think about in a way that will help you, and we call it real questions, and we want to really take these seriously and press in a way that we can help you. Again, send in your questions. Thank you for joining us. And if you know somebody these questions apply to, pass it on. We will see you on Friday for the next HeartChangeU live stream.